Hello and welcome to part 2 of this 4-part series on how to learn songs by ear. I'm your host and instructor CJ, and I'm excited to have you on board and very excited to get on to part 2, today's lesson, which is root motion and diatonic chords. In our previous lesson, we looked at active listening, how to listen and hear music like a musician, and we also looked at finding the key signature. Those are the first 2 steps in learning a song by ear. First, listening for information, and then 2, finding the key signature. Now, finding the key signature can be a bit of a challenge, especially if you're not familiar with your major and minor scales. So please get familiar with those scales and you'll be able to find your key signature a lot more easily. There are a couple of tricks or shortcuts to learning a key signature. For example, as I mentioned in the first video, you can overlay scales on top of a song and see which notes work with the song. And then once you've got a few notes that work, you can actually line them up and see what scale those notes share, what scale they have in common. And by finding the scale, you'll find the key signature. Sometimes this can be very hard to do while the song is playing, so you may want to play it through, find a note, listen carefully, find a note that sounds like it really fits with the song. Hum it, fix it in your mind, hum that note, stop the playback, and then go to the piano and find that note on the keyboard. And sometimes you find that note that you find, if you listen really carefully and find a very particular single note, that note will be the tonal center of the song, or the key signature of the song. Key signature and tonal center, those are the same thing. So once we find the key signature, then we're ready to go on to finding our root motion. It can be really challenging when you're first learning to listen for root motion, but it's very important that we develop this skill. Let it develop over time. One of the reasons why we really want to listen out for root motion is because it provides the harmonic structure for the song that we're learning. I can offer you just a little bit of reassurance that the patterns and motions and chords that you're going to be listening out for are chords and patterns that you've heard all your life. And all the songs that you've been listening to on the radio, all of these radio-friendly songs use a combination of the same common chord progressions and same elements that we're going to be dealing with today and throughout this course. When it comes to root motion, the first thing that we want to do is differentiate it from a bass line. For example, here's a bass line. That's a very popular bass line, but hidden within the bass line is the root motion that will help us find our chords. We start with an E and then an A. So within that bass line, we can find our chords if we listen for the root motion, not so much the bass line. The bass line is very melodic, rhythmic, and it pulls us in. But the root motion is really underneath of the bass line. It's part of our harmonic structure. Learning songs by ear means that you're going to develop some very basic skills. For example, relative pitch, which is being able to identify a note by having a reference note. So your key signature might give you your main tonal center note, and then you can listen for the other notes in the song relative to that first note. You may think you need perfect pitch to learn songs by ear, but perfect pitch is not required in order to learn songs by ear. Most musicians don't have perfect pitch. We have relative pitch. We can hear one note, we're given one note as a reference, and then we can find the other notes based on their relative distance from the reference note. So perfect pitch is really just ultimately a waste of time. Do not waste your time trying to acquire a perfect pitch. Develop your relative pitch and you'll be well on your way to being able to learn songs by ear and play very well by ear. So one of our main skills is developing relative pitch, but our primary skill is still pattern recognition. That's what we're going to use. Even when listening to root motion and finding chords, root motion has patterns, and so do chords that are based on these roots. And when it comes to patterns, there are different ways of looking at them. For example, when we're dealing with intervals in songs, you will find not just patterns of notes, but typical movements, typical chord progressions, typical bass and root movements and motions that you'll get very familiar with once you start recognizing them. For example, the intervals of a fourth and a fifth. These are very important root motions. Just in those three chords, in your one chord, your four chord, and your five chord, root, fourth, and fifth, just hearing those intervals can open up a world of songs. And these intervals are everywhere. Let's start with the basic song, Mary Had a Little Lamb. And let's listen to the root motion. Let's see if we can hear the root motion and harmonic movement in Mary Had a Little Lamb. Did you hear the root movement in Mary Had a Little Lamb? Did you hear it go from the one chord to the five chord? Back to the one chord to the five chord. That's just the root. The root is moving from 1 to 5. When you look at the chart, you can see when Mary Had a Little Lamb, you can see the melody and you can see the lyrics and you can see these numbers written underneath of them, written in Roman numerals. 1, 1, 5, 1. 1, 1, 5, 1. These are the chords which reflect the root motion. The root starts on the 1, which is in this case C major, and then goes to the 5 chord, which is in this case G major. This simple song, Mary Had a Little Lamb, is an excellent demonstration of the key principle of chord movement. We start on the 1 chord, we move to the 5 chord, we go back to the 1 chord. That is very strong motion when it comes to harmonic structure. Very strong chord movement from 1 to 5 to 1. It's one of the strongest, and it represents almost most songs that we're going to listen to. They start on the home of their key signature, they move away, and then they come back. It's basically just like a sequence of night and day, of inhale, exhale, tension and release, consonance and dissonance. So this consonance and dissonance, tension and release can create a rhythm. It can create its own rhythm, and that is our harmonic rhythm. How does following the root motion help you to find the chords to a song? Diatonic chords. What's a diatonic chord and why should you care? Well, a diatonic chord is a chord that belongs natively to the key signature that you're in. Diatonic chords follow an established pattern. This is how root motion can help you to figure out the chords. Because once you identify the root note singular, then the chords, the diatonic chords on top, are already laid out for you in this pattern. In a major key signature, your 1 chord is major, your 2 is minor, your 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, and 7 is diminished. We get more into that later. But as you can see, your major chords are in uppercase and your minor chords are in lowercase. This pattern is true for all of your major keys. So when you're learning a song, you find your tonal center, and your tonal center is going to be your 1 chord in a major key. It's going to be your 1 chord. And then when you listen to the other chords in the song, follow the other roots, they will most likely be one of these 7 notes. And when you play one of the 7 notes in the scale, the associated chord is usually just preset for you. You don't even have to really think about it most of the time. This is for songs that are radio friendly. Most of the radio friendly songs that you're going to learn follow this preset established pattern, particularly for triads. And keeping in mind that triads are chords. All triads are chords, but not all chords are triads. Triads have 3 notes. Chords can have 3 or more notes. If it's only 2 notes, then that's an interval. Let's look at this chart for Amazing Grace. When we look at this chart for Amazing Grace, we can see that all of the Roman numerals are capitalized. That means they're all major. Let's have a listen to it and see what these chords sound like. Here's our 1 chord. We move to the 4 chord. Back to the 1. To the 2 chord. 5 chord. But wait a minute, that 2 is major. We just looked at the chart there, and it said that the 2 chord is minor according to our diatonic pattern. But this tells us that our 2 is not minor. Well, according to this chart, our 2 is major. That makes it non-diatonic. We have a very predictable pattern of diatonic chords in a major key signature, but we also have chords that are non-diatonic that are used quite regularly. And this is a prime example of one of them. This is what we call a secondary dominant. Basically, the 5 chord is a dominant chord, and the chord, this one leading up to it, is also a dominant chord, so hence secondary. So with Amazing Grace here, we start with our 1 chord. And we're going to our 4 chord, which is F. Back to 1. All diatonic. Now we go to our D, which is non-diatonic, D major. Because it has an F sharp in it, which does not belong in the key of C major. Secondary dominants can be used in various parts of the major scale. For example, The one we just looked at, the 2, which was major, it's called the 5 of 5 because it's a 5th away from the 5 chord. This is the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the 5 chord we're going to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a secondary dominant chord that leads to this G. And then to C. So a secondary dominant, even though it's not part of a diatonic system, actually works quite well and is used quite often. And there are a few other non-diatonic situations as well. For example, if you're playing blues, you may do something like this. On your 1 chord, then go to your 4 chord, where now you've included a B flat, which is not part of your key signature, is non-diatonic. So this B flat chord doesn't seem to belong, but it works very well. So non-diatonic chords are not bad things. They accentuate our diatonic chords. They make things more interesting, basically. So these are some of the basic non-diatonic chords that you want to look out for. Secondary dominants, and as well as little addition pieces like this. 4, 1, 4, 1, and then go into your 4 chord, up another 4. These sorts of things happen very regularly. So that's a pattern that you want to look out for. That's basically the main takeaway of everything in this lesson again, is that it's all about patterns that you've heard before, that you may not have noticed before, but now you'll be listening to them in a new way and being able to hear them differently. So this one here, listening out for root motion, we know that that's really hard. It's not easy to hear it. So I've got lots of examples down below where I've got songs, and I've taken out just the bass, just for these 3 songs: Mary Had a Little Lamb, Amazing Grace, and Alicia Keys, one of Alicia Keys' songs, which has a very common chord progression: 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. All right. Alicia Keys, like everybody else, uses the same harmony, has the same harmonic rules that we're dealing with today. So no matter whose songs you're learning, you can apply these rules. Get the key signature, follow the root motion, get the diatonic chords. Finding the root motion and listening out for harmonic chord progressions is not an easy skill to develop. This may take some time. Be patient with yourself. Listen carefully. Use the best audio system that you have access to with low frequencies. Even if you got to get some headphones, you can listen on headphones to try to hear those low bass notes. And it's going to take some time to be able to pick them out. But once you do, it's going to be worth it. You pick those notes out, and then you've got your diatonic chords. Now, like I said, this is harder than finding your key signature, but this is really it. Now, after this, after you've got your diatonic chords, that's when we go into, in our next lesson, in lesson 3, that's when we're going to go into looking at inversions, inverting these chords, using voicings, right? Really looking at what musicians do with this harmonic structure. It's not easy to find this underlying harmonic structure, right? What we usually hear are the things on top, the inversions and the melodies and all of that sort of stuff. That's the stuff that we are going to be doing in the next lessons. But before that stuff can really, before you can really get a handle on it, we really want to get these foundational pieces in place for us. We want to make sure that we've got our form. We're going to make sure that we've got our chords and our root motion. And from there, we can add our inversions, we can add our color. This is where we start adding color and all of those sorts of things. Our harmonic structure doesn't have much to do with coloring and all of that sort of thing. But in our next lesson, when we're dealing with inversions and voicings, so just so you know what a voicing is. A voicing is best demonstrated. It'd be like this. Instead of playing C as a straight triad, You can make an inversion, which is interesting, but you can make a voicing like this, like the C13. It's much more complex than an inversion. So we'll look at how we're going to make inversions as well as voicings, because we're going to need these voicings for when we're playing our melodies. When we've got a melody on top, we want to play a melody, we've got to use inversions and voicings to be able to add some color to it and really interpret it and make it our own. All right, so that's in our next lessons, in lessons 3 and 4. But take some time. We've got plenty of material in the exercises, lots of exercises for you to do, just for you to train up in listening for the root motion. Listen for the low end, the bass. Follow it. Write it down. Get your key signature for a song. Then write down the notes that you find. Put numbers to them if possible. Get the key signature. Get these diatonic chords in there. I know it's not easy. Be patient with yourself. So I'm really excited for you. Really hope that you're getting something out of these lessons. Get those exercises done. Practice learning songs by ear. It's the only way to master it, is to keep doing it. I'm giving you the steps, but each one of these steps requires time and effort. But once you got them, then every song, any song, is at your disposal. That's it for this lesson. I'll see you next time.